Chapter 8 The Lumber Camp The moon was almost as bright as day. Mr. Hill whispered, "Look out." Very quietly, very slowly the other tent flaps opened. The children saw the large black bear, but he did not hear them or smell them. He did not smell anything but the bacon. Back and forth it swung as he hit it with his big paw. "Don't be afraid, Violet," whispered Alice. "The bear won't hurt us. He is afraid of us." Just then the bacon fell at the bear's feet. Down he went on all fours again. He lay down and began to chew the bacon. "Ho hum," thought Benny. "There goes our bacon." Just then Mr. Hill flashed a light in the bear's face. The bear jumped up and ran off into the woods as fast as he could run. "Didn't he look funny?" laughed Benny. "But he left our bacon." "That was a wonderful sight," said Henry. "I am certainly glad that Mr. Hill happened to wake up." They were soon asleep again. They did not know that Joe had asked Mr. Hill to come because he could show them a big black bear. They did not know that Mr. Hill and the bear were good friends. The bear knew that he would find food wherever Mr. Hill was. The next morning, Mr. Hill said as he and Joe made a fire, "I must leave you after breakfast. When you start off, you'll soon come to a lumber camp." "I wish you would leave that baker to wash dishes in," said Benny. "Yes, I brought it for you," said Mr. Hill with a smile. He washed the bacon well and cut it in thin pieces. Soon it was cooking in the pan over the fire. Hot cereal and canned milk seemed delicious in the cold morning air. Mr. Hill made quick bread in a little baker. As soon as the bread was done, the children began to hear many blue jays in the trees. "They want our breakfast," said Mr. Hill, looking up. "Wait until we sit down and then see how near they will come. Throw some pieces on the ground." The air was full of blue jays. 6 or 7 beautiful birds flew to the ground. The children could almost touch them. "Come on, everybody," said Benny at last. "I want to see that lumber camp." He began to pick up the dishes, making the birds fly back into the trees. Jessie laughed. "What a housekeeper you are!" all of a sudden she said. "Let's all help." Soon the camp was all clean again. Everything was packed in the canoes, and Mr. Hill gave them each a push. "Thanks, Mr. Hill," said Joe to his old friend. "Thanks for everything," Jessie called back as the two canoes went smoothly down the lake. The children waved until Mr. Hill turned and went back into the woods. "He was nice, wasn't he?" said Violet. "All Maine guides are nice, Violet," laughed Joe. Fish were jumping here and there in the water beside the canoes. "Oh, can't we go fishing today, Joe?" asked Benny. "We'll have to go fishing," said Joe, "unless we want to eat beans for 3 days. When we get around 2 or 3 looks, we'll stop and fish." "2 or 3 what?" asked Benny. "Looks," replied Joe. "See that turn in the lake? You can't see around it yet. They call that a look." "That's a good name for it," said Jessie. "What do we fish with?" "Didn't you see the fishing rods Mr. Hill brought us?" asked Benny. "He brought 2, one for each canoe. We can take turns fishing." "We fish with flies," Joe told them, "not real flies. I have a box of gray ghosts in my pack. They look like real flies to the fish, so they go after them and get caught." The canoes passed the next look and the next. Then Joe called back to Henry. "Want to stop and fish?" "You bet," called Henry. "You'll have to show us how." "Alice knows how," called Joe. He stopped paddling. "She'll show you and Violet." The two canoes floated together as Joe and Alice each put a pretty gray ghost fly on their lines. Then Joe whipped his line out over the water. "That's nice, Joe," cried Benny. "Isn't it easy? When you get a fish, let me try, will you?" "Sure," said Joe, smiling. "Sit very still now." "Oh, look!" cried Jessie. "You've got a fish, Alice. Pull it in." "Not so fast," answered Alice. "You have to play these fellows." She pulled her line in very slowly and carefully. Everyone watched her land the large fish and take it off the hook. Then Joe caught one. Benny could hardly wait. "Now it's my turn," he cried. "Right," said Joe. "You saw me whip the line over the water. Now you do it." Benny took the rod. He lifted it as Joe had done. Whip went the line, but it did not go out over the water. It went backwards over his head. "Look out!" cried Joe to Alice, but he was too late. The hook caught fast in her hair and pulled it down over her face. "Oh, Alice, your pretty smooth hair," said Violet. "I'm sorry, Alice," called Benny. "I don't see how I did that." "Never mind," said Alice. "I ought to have been watching. Everyone misses the first time. Violet will soon get the hook out." Violet leaned over at once and worked the hook out. "Don't do that again, Benny," she said. "It's not as easy as it looks, Benny, to whip that line out," said Jessie. "You'd better let Joe do the fishing." "No, not at all," Joe answered. "Let him try again. He ought to learn." Benny fished and fished, but he found it worth while when he caught 3 trout. He looked at every spot on the fish as if he had made it himself. At last Joe said, "We have enough fish now. The men at the lumber camp will want to feed us, but it's nice to have our own food too." "See the logs in the water over there," said Alice. "The men at the camp roll the logs onto the water and they float down them by themselves." When the children started off again, they began to hear the sound of axes. Soon they could hear a great crash when a tree fell. At last they heard a lumberman calling to them. "Hi, hi!" They all waved to him. "Paddle in, Henry," said Joe. "We'll stay here tonight." The man seemed very glad to see them. Right away he asked them to stay to dinner. "Yes, we'll be glad to," said Joe. "We have a lot of fish here, but we'd like to put up our tents and your fire for the night." "Fine," said the man, who was the boss. "Hi, Cookie, we have company." The cook looked up with a laugh. "Come in. Stay as long as you want. You like beans?" Benny went up to the cook. "We just love beans," he said. "But we got a lot of fish. I'll show you the ones I caught." "You can't tell them apart," said Henry. "Oh, yes, I can," said Benny. "I caught 3, and I know every one. I caught this one, and this one, and this one." "They look just alike to me," said Cookie with a smile. "Cook them for the little boy, Cookie," said the boss. "Fix them all up." When dinner was ready, Cookie let Benny ring the bell. The lumbermen came crashing through the bushes. "They always hurry that way in their dinner," said Cookie. The men made room for the visitors. There were 3 tables full of people. Baked beans and quick bread made a fine dinner. After dinner, the boss said, "You show the visitors how we cut the trees, Bill." "Bill," whispered Violet to Joe. They all looked to see which man was Bill, but they knew right off it was not the Bill they were hunting for. He was too young. The afternoon went by too quickly. After a supper of their cooked fish, they went to bed in their own tents. The lumbermen had little log houses. "Don't be surprised if you hear porcupines," said the boss. "They like the grease around here, and they come most every night." "What do they sound like?" said Henry. "Like pigs," said the boss. "They squeal and they chew. When they chew, it sounds like someone sawing wood." When the camp was quiet, Henry woke up suddenly. He thought it was morning and the men were sawing. Then he heard many loud squeals and said to himself, "It's porcupines." But the squeals had all the rest, wakened all the rest, and both tent doors opened. "What a noise!" whispered Jessie. "Where are they?" "See that ball?" asked Alice. "Right by the table? That is a porcupine. He is chewing the table to get the grease." There were 5 porcupines in all, eating and squealing. When the children had watched them for a long time, Joe said, "We must get our sleep. They'd better go." Then he flashed a light at them. They rolled into balls and kept very still. But when Joe flashed the light again, they went hurrying away into the woods. "Well," said Jessie, lying down, "we see our most interesting sights in the middle of the night." "I hope they won't come back," said Alice, because Joe says tomorrow will be a hard day, but even Joe had no idea how hard the next day was going to be.